There it is. Here we go. Um, yeah, I'm just going to go with Candice. Here we go. Candice,
Yeah.
welcome to the show. I'm excited you're here. I'm sorry that we're a week late. That's on me. I think I miscommunicated. It doesn't matter. Anyway,
We're here.
we're here. We're doing the thing.
We are
Um,
here. Yes.
I like to start with kind of an existential question,
Sure.
and then I end with one.
I
Neither have
love
really
those.
anything to do with your book. But when
Okay.
you try to explain like what you are, kind of why you are, what is that for people listening that are like, yeah,
Ooh.
yeah, what is that?
Um, I'm a writer because one, words make me feel safe. Um, Words are sacred to me. And I really feel like and believe that there was a call placed on my life to use words to help people figure out how to live better lives.
Hmm. Hmm. What do you do besides write books? What do you do?
So I am the daily health education. No, what is my title? Who? Because my boss is probably gonna listen to this. So I am the daily lifestyle education and health writer at the Griot, which is a Black media news space. And I do that. My podcast, I actually will have a podcast with them that will drop soon. And other than that, I am, as a theologian, the work that I do is I work with churches and nonprofit organizations to really think more critically about issues of gender equity and faith,
Hmm.
and what it means to think much more broadly and much more intentionally about our faith lives and how it intersects with the other work that we need to do in the world to bring about change.
Hmm. So again, nothing to do with your book. So if I was to go to the Griot and read your words, like what am I reading? Like what goes into that? Like because now because I don't know what the
Yeah.
Griot is, but I only read
Okay.
books and
Yeah.
Fed Reserve
So
reports. That's it.
So for me, when you go to the lifestyle, you're gonna go to the lifestyle section. I my work is really about what does it mean for us to thrive? What does it mean for us to move from a space, particularly for African Americans, move out of this space of like survival um, to a place of thriving. I'm also you're going to read about, for me, the importance of resilience and grace. So right now we're in the midst of a Catch 2022 series where the third week, statistically, the third week of January is when everybody abandons their New Year's resolutions. And Catch 2022 is
That's
about
this
how
week,
do
right?
we,
Isn't that this week?
yeah, like this is when everybody pieces them out. And so Catch 2022 is about how do we still maximize and honor the year and what we want to do while also still giving grace to ourselves. So one of the pieces that I did in there were like fun fitness routines for people who want to work out but are not going to the gym because the gyms are overcrowded and everybody doesn't want to work out in a mask, right? So
Yeah.
it's those kind of pieces that really get to like, how do we think through what it means to live whole and
Mm,
full lives,
mm.
while also, honoring like the space that we need to give ourselves as we navigate that.
Yeah. No, I like that. So getting to why you're actually here. So you wrote a book, got it in my hand for people that are, well, you can't see, I can turn around. There it is. Yeah. So for people that can't see the video, you can't see the book, but it's in the show notes and you can go buy the book.
Yes.
However, I have just a really passive aggressive sarcastic question and I actually can't find where I underlined it. And that's
Uh-huh.
my fault. I've gotten in the habit of reading books on Amazon and you
Oh,
can
okay.
just like click the highlight, and then I don't really have to remember page numbers. I just have to remember the
Right.
quote. So I'm going to
Okay.
badly paraphrase your quote. You say somewhere in the beginning, like either in the intro or like in the very first chapter, that like this book is not for me. And I say that for
Hmm.
me as like a white, balding, middle-aged man. So who's it
Yeah.
for?
I wrote this book for primarily for Black women who were born and raised in the church, or are church adjacent, and are trying to make sense of the world around them, and make sense of their emerging questions around faith and
Mm,
feminism. And then, much more broadly, I wrote it for women, across gender and across racial and ethnic identities. Because when you think about faith, there are so many people who are as impacted by the ways that religion and patriarchy and sexism intersect
mm,
to be sites of oppression. So it's a Black woman's story because I'm a Black woman, and shared these experiences with so many sisters that I know. But it's also a woman's story, and what we have experienced as we navigate faith spaces.
mm, there's your dog. I hear him. I hear
I was trying to mute, but it's not gonna work.
him. It's fine. It's fine. On this show, so I don't know if I've ever said this out. So there's two versions of this show, Candice. There's the one that I'm
Hmm.
too lazy to edit, and that just goes right to the patrons because why not?
Okay.
And in that one, not always in that one, but most time in that one of my two dogs will always do that little ear flap thing that
Okay.
sounds like a helicopter, and I've
Uh-huh.
mixed that. It's in every single episode. I like put it in there. So, but I've had babies on the show and lawnmowers. I had the royal wedding like motorcade when I was talking with Tom Wright, like just
Uh-huh.
random. So it's fine. Let the dog
Okay.
bark. Nobody
Okay.
cares. We let the dog.
Okay.
So you in this story weave stories about friendship, which I like the way you and your friends are like holding each other accountable because I've got friends like
Hmm.
that as well, just a few miles away. That I mean, we I don't know what the word is. They're not friends. They're more like brothers. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, what do you feel like is the role of an actual friend when it comes to someone's
Oh, wow.
like not life, but like someone's ability to remember who they are, if that makes any sense? Like, what is the role of that? Because I think that nobody knows how to do that anymore because of social media, fakeness, the internet,
Yeah.
etc. So, but I love the stories that you tell about your friends in this book, and you can share any of those or people can read them. That's totally up to you.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. I think friends are supposed to be mirrors for us, right? That, like, red lip theology starts and exists primarily because my best friend came to check on me, and was honest and said, like, you don't look like my best friend anymore. And I had to be honest and say, I don't feel like her. If we were the kinds of friends that did not have that kind of reciprocity of truth, then that moment wouldn't have taken place,
Mm,
right? So, like, I
mm,
think that friends, one, are there to help mirror who we were, but also to reflect who we can be and who we should be. And I would have not, um, I wouldn't be who I am had I not had those kinds of friends. And I try very hard to be that kind of friend,
mm,
because there is because you want everybody to thrive. You want everybody to soar in their particular spaces and ways, and you want for everyone to be lifted, and you want for everyone to feel and know love, right?
mm,
Even if you don't know them. Like, a world with no love is a sad, sad place to be,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
So so the people who are in my life that I want to know love, I'm going to do what I can do to reflect that and to show that to them.
Yeah. So if red lip theology is a systematic theology, why not?
Mhm.
Because
Right? Why
people
not?
like boxes. What is the system that you grew up in, and then how does that contrast with red lip theology? So like, what's the tulip of what your upbringing was, and that's a deep cut for
Yeah.
people listening. And then what is red lip theology? I don't need an acronym. That's not fair.
No, that's good. So I was born and raised in the Black Missionary Baptist Church. So much of what I understood about God was very transactional. That if I did these things, God would do these things.
Mm,
And it created a very black and white um understanding of of who I should be and what my faith should be, right?
mm,
And that there was no room for gray. And when I veered outside of these spaces, there was so much shame and guilt that I had because it was like, how could you? How
mm.
could you do that? Like you know better, right? And and internalizing that shame and internalizing that guilt, I did not think and feel highly of myself. And I felt like I would always have to work, produce to show my, you know, my to be worthy, to be validated. And that's just not who God is.
Mm,
And so as I began to, I mean, I always had questions, but college really gave me room to explore those questions. Being in my young adulthood and on my own, I really got to experience, I mean, really got to answer a lot of those questions. It wasn't really until my mom passed away unexpectedly that I feel like I had like this crises of faith
mm,
that really forced me to move into a what do I really think about God and what has always been intuitive to me about my faith and about who God is. And so red lip theology, the ways that it differs from from the system that I grew up in is that God is much more empathetic and compassionate. And God is not this petty man that is waiting for me to that always knew I was gonna mess up this way and is withholding certain things from me because I don't know what to do with them, right?
mm.
That like
Yeah.
that, but that like God is impacted by me and my choices just as God impacts me and my choices.
Mm,
And I had to really come to a space where, and Relic Theology helped with this, and this is really the tone of the book. What does it mean to be in relationship, right? Like, so everybody talks about healthy relationships, right? Healthy relationships, people communicate, people compromise. It's not a dictatorship. Like all of these all of these essentials to what a thriving relationship look like are also what I realized I should apply to my relationship with God.
mm,
That we communicate. Like I get to say, I'm feeling a way about how things are going, and I need you to know that. And that every move that I make is not some like predestined, you know, before I make the step, God knew I was gonna like that for me is not a healthy way to approach faith.
mhm.
It's not liberative. And so in those ways, relative theology freed me from a system that was rigid and really allowed me to be and have more grace in how I come to know God.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a very similar upbringing of what my view of God was and predestination, and I used Tulip on purpose. So I'm from an
Hmm.
independent, regular Baptist church, which
Hmm.
is like we see Southern Baptist and be like, "Nah, you're not strict
Right.
enough for us. We're gonna need to go a little bit more."
Really?
Yeah, and then so I read your stories of college, and I laughed out loud on the couch reading your story in the library there of that dude. It's like, well, what kind of theology? You're like, I'm this type of theology,
Hmm.
because I went to Liberty, so I did not have that
Oh
open space to. Yeah, I
yeah.
went
Uh-huh.
in. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So
Hmm.
and then yeah, instead of working through it in college, I worked through it in a podcast. But but yeah,
We all
no,
work through
yeah,
it.
yeah. And I've come to really think that version of God of what you described, that's like just a sociopathic God that I don't
Yeah.
want to be involved with. It's not
Right.
loving at
Yeah,
all.
it's
Yes,
not.
I definitely relate to that. I have a question about a term, ride or die. And so there's a chapter in here. I don't know where it is because it's around like page 45, but you're talking about sin. And so I'd like to circle the drain on sin there a little bit.
Hmm.
But so on page 46, you say, all I know, is it all right, Candace, if I read your own book to you? Is that
Of
fine?
course, of
Yeah.
course, of course.
All I knew was
Yeah.
Adam and Eve introduced sin into the world. Well, actually, it was just Eve. Because the big biblical writers told the pair they could have anything in the Garden of Eden, but couldn't eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then you go on to go tell a bit about the serpent and yada yada, yada yada, and you end up saying when Adam saw Eve eating the fruit up, he said YOLO, took a bite, and you would think this is the first moment of romantic solidarity, which is when I busted out laughing, showing Adam to be ride or die, and then you go on to talk about that's not how it was. So, what does ride or die look like in like a biblical relationship?
Yeah.
And
So
more
writer.
importantly, then after that stupid question, what do we do with sin? But answer the funny one first because it makes me
Yeah.
laugh. Right? I've never had
So
ride or die applied to Adam and Eve.
yeah, like right, like Adam really did throw his girl under the bus. Like it was like, well, this woman you gave me. I mean, I didn't pick her. Like she just was here. She did it, and she told me it was okay. Like it was this moment where I'm like, okay, so we don't get no, I did it. Like let me stand. I mean, remember all of those the Christian family like things where they use the umbrella and they
Oh
say
yeah,
like God is
yeah,
and then
yeah,
and then the
yeah.
husband and then the wife like he didn't even he wasn't an umbrella. Like he literally was like
I'm making that a
he
shirt. Be an umbrella.
be an umbrella. Like he literally was like, she did it. I don't have nothing to do with this. This isn't my fault. And so, like, what's funny to me is, and I think this is probably, if my mother was here and if we had my grandmother on this line, this is probably why I always got in trouble. Because to me, the whole situation is a setup. Like, why would you put something? I'll never forget. Case in point, my mama bought some I will never forget. They were some like death by chocolate cookies. And she put them on the table and she was like, you can't have any. Oh, okay. Like you put them on the table and then you tell me I can't have any. So then she left. I ate a cookie. And then I went to brush my teeth because I didn't want her to know that I eating the cookie. And she came and like bust in the house because something told her that I had eaten a cookie. So when I got in trouble, I was like, well, why did you leave them on the table? You knew I was gonna eat the cookie. So for me, when I look at it, the story of the garden, there are so many conversations that people have about the garden. And I wanted to problematize it a bit and say, because we have agency and because we have free will, what if we have completely misread Eve? What if we get to glory and Eve was like, no, like I did it And it was the best thing that I ever did. Not because the outcome was what she wanted, but because of the ways that the implication of that decision or the consequence of that decision opened her up to parts of herself that she didn't know, ways that she had to grow in ways that she didn't know, right? And so
Mm,
I think about that often, which is why I try not to use the language of consequences.
mm,
I think that each choice has an implication. Like there's some times that I did some foolishness and I paid dearly for it. There were some times that I did what people expected me to do. And once I finished it and it was the quote unquote right decision, it didn't sit well with me.
mm,
Right.
mm,
Um, and I think that if there's a way for us to, particularly because so often we read Adam and Eve with such this vitriol of the entrance of sin, right? This is when the world has fallen. But how can we reclaim it in a way that we extend them grace so that we give it back to ourselves? Like I don't want to always see myself, I don't want to always see people as the worst thing they've ever done.
mm,
I don't, right?
mm, mm,
There's so much more to me, but and there's so much more to add. There was so much more to Adam and Eve than the two of them eating, and I hope it was good. Like I used to say when I for that limited time that I taught Bible study before my pastor caught me in the office and was like, "So this isn't gonna work." Um, but like I used to say, like, I hope when we get there, they are like, that fruit was good. Because I told them, I was
Worth
like,
it.
there's nothing worse than biting into a nasty orange or
Mm,
like there's nothing worse than the fruit that just disappoints you.
mm,
So I said I hope that they're happy, but I do think that the space that I try to situate that conversation in and other conversations around this notion of sin moves us out of these kind of social mores that people tell us are sinful, but invite us to really think critically about our relationship with God, what we have been called to be in the world, who we're called to be in the world, and the decisions that we make that are either in service of that or not in service of that, right? So
mm,
like we know that it is not a sin. I mean that it is like I'm not supposed to go out here and just shoot somebody, right? Like that it is that is wrong.
frowned upon.
Right. What do we do? Like literally, because it can some places, right? But then what do we do when I may have to take a life to save mine
Mm,
or to save someone else's, right? Like, do we justify that? Do we, like the ways that we find mitigating factors
mm,
in spaces, and I'm somebody who I don't believe in violence in any form. But I do know that there are times in which you have to protect yourself and those that you love,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, do I think that when you engage in violence in that way, it grieves God's heart? Absolutely. Do I think that God sees you solely in that space? No, I don't, right?
Mm, yeah.
My parents were not married. Um, there were people who maligned my mother, did not malign my father. Um, but my mama refused to see that act as sinful because she did not want to raise me in a context that said I was any less loved and beloved of God because because I did not have two married parents. right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like that was really my first space of interrogating what sin actually means. Like my mom was like, I'm not, no, like absolutely not. Like God had to get you here
Mm.
because there's something that you are gonna have to do at a certain time. And God is not bound by, she said, God is not bound by what we think has to happen in order for something to take place.
Yeah.
And so when we think about that, we've got to move out of a space of sin being this very rigid thing, but really looking at it as like, what actions am I doing that's diminishing my flourishing?
Mm.
What actions am I doing that are working to complicate a fruitful relationship between me and God? Those will differ. There will be some universalities,
Yeah.
but there will also be some different decisions and different responses based on who you are and your relationship with God. And we've got to create room for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've said this before, and I don't know if I've ever said it the same way twice, but it's the same general vague thing. So what I heretically probably think sin is, and I don't care about heresy anymore because who cares? Um, I think that
Literally.
sin is like when I in community with you. So you're in it. I think you're in Atlanta, right? Isn't that right? Or
Mm-hmm.
somewhere. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I ride down there and I intentionally do something on purpose that breaks shalom, and that
Mm-hmm.
is sin. Like I
Mm-hmm.
did it on purpose, and it
Mm-hmm.
something died. What I tell my kids all the time is when you make these decisions intentionally or unintentionally, but specifically intentionally, things break and things die because that's the wage of sin. Like so, your friendships die, your trust that mom and dad had in you die, your whatever the thing is, something dies. And when you do the opposite of that, when you hit the mark, you make life because we bear the image of a God that
I
creates
like
life.
that.
So you choose. That's you can't preach that in a Baptist church, but that's what I think.
But that's
Um,
what it is. I love that.
yeah,
Anything that breaks shalom, anything that does not produce life,
yeah,
like in all of its forms,
mm,
like that is sin. And the grace for us, should we take it, is that we're given opportunities to do better. We're given opportunities to learn and to hold ourselves accountable and move differently, that allow us to shift who we are and what we think, right? That like that there's space for us to be different and to be better. Like we have that capacity. And yeah, I think that that's, for me, really when I wrote this book, it was about that capacity. Like how, like I stood at, I tell people like the walking through the valley of the shadow of death is never fun. Like living life in the shadow of your worst nightmare. And then having all of these other things happen that you are now trying to make sense of is never fun and it's never good. And yet there is this ability to rise above it. There is this ability to move beyond it, and not in a way that negates all that has happened to you, but in a way that says that these things opened me up to the possibility and the capacity to be different. And that is a sacred bond and a sacred trust. Um,
yeah,
and so yeah, I hope that as people read it, that's what they walk away with.
yeah, yeah. Well, there's a few chapters in here. Before I move on, you talk about like violence against somebody that was messing with you, your family, or
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I could think of for some reason in the back of my head when you were talking is that "Try Jesus" song. Do you know this song?
Try
It's
Jesus, not me.
I gotta throw hands. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
if cognitive bias was ever a song,
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
it. I will listen to it with
Yes.
my kids. They like it. I like it. It just we like
Uh-huh.
it anyway. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's that's my anyway. That's my jam. I love that song.
I
I
love
love
that song
that.
too.
I
I
love,
did it.
yeah, I will. You touch me in mine. We gonna have scrap. Um,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. So no, you got some painful chapters in here that were hard to read. Like you got a chapter we're
Mhm.
talking about an affair that you were
Mhm.
involved in.
Mhm.
Which to be honest, Candice, I don't think I could write that in a book and be like, it's fine, put it in
Mhm.
print, put it out there. Um, like, and then there's a chapter on some movement in your views on LGBTQ
Mhm.
issues. And it's that chapter I want to ask a question about. So there's, and I can't remember in this book, I think the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but maybe they weren't. Doesn't matter. So
Mhm.
there's a part in here where a friend of yours named Daryl is calling you out
Uh-huh.
and he's saying, you got time for this dude, you got time for that dude, and that dude was the one, and now this dude's the one. But did you see? I mean, that dude right there,
Right.
we're riding or dying. I brought my Honey Crisp apples. Like we're doing this. I brought them. But he asked you, how much time do I get as your friend? Which was a
Mhm.
really powerful question for me. For those that haven't read that chapter, what does
Yeah.
that question kind of all entail? And then what are some of the implications of the answer to it?
Ooh. I'm remembering that moment. So, and what's funny is I didn't tell him until he read it,
Mm,
and he called me crying, because he was just like, I had absolutely no idea that that moment was so pivotal for you. Um, Going back to friendship, right? That we started this conversation with, that they are to be the mirrors for us. The truth was that in that moment, because of my skewed ability, to see beyond what I had been taught, I was not a good friend to him. And this is somebody who had prayed for me, who I
mm,
who I know knows Jesus. And this is somebody who had lifted me and continued to lift me every time one of those dudes, made clear that they were not the one. um, and and I and I grieved the fact that I allowed religion to hold me. I hear it. I grieve the fact that I allowed religion to keep me from being a good friend. And so I had to literally sit back and say, if scripture says, try the spirit by the spirit to see if it be of God. And I know that Darrell walks with God. And I know that God talks to Darrell and Darrell talks back to God. What do I lose by honoring that his who he loves has absolutely nothing to do, one, with me, and two, with his ability to be a good fundamental person who grounds his life in wisdom and the teachings of Jesus, right? Um, and that, like, and to be very honest about the fact that we had been using and have been using doctrine and conversations from centuries ago
mm.
to have conversations about sex and sexuality that continues to evolve, right? Like these are conversations that continue to evolve. There is scholarship, biblical scholarship, that says and suggests that sex is not as black and white in scripture as we made it, that sexuality may not be as black and white in scripture as we made it, right? And so, how do I take all of that and honor that my friends love looks different, who my friend loves, it looks different than me and who I love, but fundamentally, like, he is a good person,
Hmm.
and that God created us all with intentionality. And our differences and our diversities matter to God, and they matter to the world that God intended to create. And so it's sacred, right? Like I'll never forget hearing Bishop Yvette Flunder say, and it just blew me away. She said, "I am a same gender loving woman because it is the will of God for my life." And when she said that, I was like, whoa, like I never saw that, even of just how all of us come, every part of us is a part of who God created us to be, to fulfill our purpose in the earth.
Hmm.
And lastly, I will say that this world is so full of pain and heartache and loss and grief and hatred. How dare we, really, how dare we say that people cannot have and find love because it looks different? Like,
Hmm.
to find love in this world is God to me, right?
Hmm.
Like to
Hmm.
to find somebody that you want to walk through this world with, whether for a season or for a lifetime, that's holy.
Yeah.
And I just refuse to I refuse to deny that holiness because I don't want to think differently.
Yeah. Yeah. So, quick question.
Hmm.
Because it's not what your book is about, although I have a few
Hmm.
books on it. One of them is from, it's called Rethinking Incarceration from Dominique. I don't know if you know, I can't think of his name right now. Dominique Dubois Gilliard, I think. Anyway, so
Okay.
your
Hmm.
doctoral work or your graduate work was going to be on like the theology and the intersection of mass incarceration.
Hmm.
Like that can't be something that you're just like, just kidding, I'm not doing that anymore. Like when are you finishing this work, PhD or not? Because that's a whole
Yeah.
different topic. That's a whole nother hour. Um, but
Yeah.
but can you speak a bit to that as long as you want to? Because that's not really what the book is about. Like it's
No, it's so funny. It's so funny that you said that because somebody inboxed me the other day and was like, "So, like, are you gonna
yeah.
go
You said
back
a
to that?"
paragraph. Are you gonna do anything with this?
And I was like, "Oh." But what's funny is that I've thought about it for a while. One, I'm thinking through an entire project on sin, like taking sin and really sitting with it, and like what it means to have to reimagine how we talk about it.
Mm,
But um but out of that really comes how we recognize what we characterize as what it means to be safe in in this country, right? That there have to be people who are sinners and who
mm,
are bad, and they need to be put away from us, right? And then there has to be those of us who do not engage in the work of iniquity and crime, and we get to flourish and thrive out here in the world. What does that mean for how we see who is blessed, who is favored, who is not, right? Um, and then how do we use that to justify what is often the inhumane treatment of those who are incarcerated?
mm,
Um,
mm.
and it is beyond the ways that they strike when the food and the plumbing and the living conditions are so poor, right?
Yeah, yeah, or
It
the
is the
vaccination or
or the
mass
vaccine,
conditions or
right?
anything. Yeah,
Like
yeah, all that.
it's beyond that. It's the way that we have decided that they don't even deserve to be touched,
Yeah.
right? It's the way that we decided that they don't deserve hugs. That it, like I have a cousin who is currently incarcerated. The way the hoops that I'm having to go through just to send him a book, my book, because I want him to have it. It's crazy to me, right? That
Mm.
like that there are ways for women who are incarcerated who are not even guaranteed feminine hygiene products.
Yeah.
Like you gotta buy those, and if you don't have them in commissary, if you don't have money in commissary, like you
Sorry.
know,
Yeah.
yeah. And so it. How have we decided that that's okay because they may or may not have done made a mistake or done something that we deem, deserving of that kind of treatment, um, that work for me was important, because for the work I was doing in seminary, we have to have a field education experience, and I got placed at the youth detention center, and I was like, okay, like this is I don't want to be here. This is not the work that I'm doing. I was there. I was only supposed to have, we were having 2 field placements. I took that one and I did not leave.
Mm.
Like I went back to the field education director and was like, please keep me here. Like I stayed, and when I graduated from Duke, I cried because I didn't want to leave them. And I've kept in touch with many of them who have gotten out and gone on to do well. Some of them, were reincarcerated. Um, 2 of them were killed, and
Mm.
I had to, and that was hard. But that experience fundamentally changed my life.
Yeah.
And I wanted us to really sit with, especially because I was in this youth prison context. There was a 10-year-old at the time who had committed murder, who would be in there until they turned 18. And the likelihood was that they would go from there to the state facility.
Mm.
And when we talked to him, he was like, yeah, I did a bad thing. When can I go home? Like there was
Yeah.
no comprehension of the fact that like a life was gone. But I was in there and it was majority Black and brown boys, and the people that were coming to preach and teach to them about Jesus were white. And I was like, even that was something that I was like, we actually need to interrogate this too, right? Um, and so yeah, I think even as I have moved away from that work, I haven't because I still do work with corrections. I am still very much a part of organizations that are working to think through these things theologically. I have broached the book, a book topic project with my editor.
Do it.
Yeah, like I do like and I mean larger for me is that I really want to have a conversation about sin. Like I just like I really just want to write a book called Sin and just really sit with like how have we framed it? What is it really? And and I'm gonna be quiet because I know we got other stuff to talk about. When you read, I think that's the other part for people. When you read other theological works, you get so many different constructions of what sin is, right? And like there's this, I thought I had it. I'm gonna have to give you the name of it, but he's a Japanese theologian, and his construction of sin around is basically that sin is whatever we do that evokes shame. So whether it is shame in us or whether we have done something that creates shame in someone else,
Mm.
that is sin. And I remember having a conversation with my homegirl because I'm one of those that like writes in my book and like highlights in my like and I just had to screenshot her the pages. And I said, this is how so many people have communal understandings of what sin is. Like that it moves us out of this kind of like individualistic, oh, if you have sex before marriage, you're sinful. But it moves us out of that kind of like individualistic conversation to what are my actions communally and
Mm.
how are they working to lead people to more life,
Yeah.
or how are they working to break shalom, right? Like what am I doing? And for me, I think that's what grieves God's heart,
Mm.
right? That when we do things that diminish people's hope, right? That like I can go into prayer. I can have my conversation with God and God can tell me like, okay, like, so you were on 10 today. Like maybe tomorrow let's try to stay at a 4 or 5 because you did a lot. Like your ain't like I like it's so funny because I told my friend, I said one day I'm gonna write a piece about living with anxiety and how I know that God some days is like, you took me through. So I know that the people that you are doing life with are exhausted.
Yeah, you know that
So
eclipse? That was a timeout for me. I'd had enough. I had to do a whole
like
eclipse just for a
listen,
minute.
when people say that scripture that says that God neither slumbers nor sleep, I know that there are times that God has been like, I gotta take a nap because she's done a lot and I need a moment, right? And I told her, I said, I can be in my space and in my work with God, and God can show me because of the relationship that we have, the growing edges that I need to work on. I think where God gets grieved and most disappointed is when I do something that has hurt somebody else, right? That like I done moved on from it, said what I had to say, gone about my business, and it sparked shame. It sparked guilt. It rubbed the skin off of an insecurity of an old wound, and now they're having to live with resurfaced emotions and feelings that they would not have had to had I not done that.
Yeah.
That's when I know God is looking at me like, you what you out here doing.
Yeah.
And so I said all that to say that I do think for me, having much more conversations about sin and accountability do encompass the work that we got to do to think about mass incarceration, to think about policing differently,
Hmm.
um, and to think about who gets the power to be the ones who are doing the surveillance, and who is theologically positioned to be the surveilled. And I think that as we move into what I think I don't think that we will be without a generation. I don't think ever again we will be without a generation that does not consistently call policing to task,
Mm.
that does not consistently call correction systems and criminal justice systems to task. And I think that it is incumbent upon us to really think through what that looks like, particularly from Christian standpoints. And so those are conversations that I'm definitely invested in having.
Yeah. So let me circle that back up to the beginning. Just write the book. Yeah. 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 Because you can see the passion there. And I agree with that. Like I agree with a lot, if not all of that, a lot of that. So I want to two or three questions and then give you back to your
Sure.
puppy. Um, so
Who is snoring, and I
oh,
cannot believe that you cannot hear him
mm-mm.
because I am over here like Oh my gosh.
I don't hear
Oh
it.
my gosh. He sounds like a grown man. Like it's that bad.
So you say somewhere towards the last third that there are like 8 cornerstones or truths for red lip theology.
Mhm.
And so I want to read these to you and I want to ask you which one is the one. And I want to frame this question a little bit differently. So, one of the questions that I ask everyone, Candace, is what are the things that we should be intentionally talking about in our church bodies? And that if we
Mhm.
intentionally avoid them, are literally like just we're gonna just explode churches like that's a
Yes.
grenade, everybody sees it, nobody wants to talk about it, nobody's gonna call
Yes.
this out over here. So
Yes.
which one of these 8 things do you think is that, and then kind of how do we move forward in talking about it? So with those being that, one, intimacy is holy. 2, God created us for interdependence and connection. When we honor that, we thrive. 3, intimacy is necessary. 4, touch is vital, which honestly, that makes no sense to me, but that doesn't have to be your answer. 5, sex is healthy, necessary, and productive for reasons beyond reproduction. 6, God respects our agency. 7, those of us who have the privilege of experiencing physical intimacy should do so as often as we deem necessary for our health, wellness, and desires. And 8, people who identify as asexual and those for whom intimacy can be difficult because of physical and emotional limitations are no less valuable or important than those who are experiencing intimacy privilege. So, of
Mhm.
those 8 things, what's the one that you're like, yeah, we're not going to talk about that in church, but we should, and here's why?
Oh, that we should, regardless of marital status, engage in intimacy and physical connection,
Hmm.
however we deem, whenever we deem necessary.
Hmm.
We need to talk about that for all of the other reasons. But again, the ways that we are conditioned to believe that sex outside of marriage or outside of these legal covenants is sinful, does not really get us to a place of what it actually means to live and come alive, right? So like there were studies that basically talked about the lack of touch and what the lack of touch and physical intimacy do to you. And they first started, and I can't remember the country, and I hated that they did it because they started with babies, and um,
Let's say
and then
Germany.
they,
Why not?
yeah, it was one of them that when you read the stuff, you were like, it makes sense they would do stuff like that over there.
North Korea.
Um, right, literally. Um, they had at various generations they withheld touch from whether it was a baby, whether it was a child, whether it was a teen, whether it was a young adult, whether it was an adult, whether it was an elderly person. They withheld touch and
Hmm.
physical connection. And the ways that their body, the ways that their organs and their systems began to negatively respond to the lack of touch and physical intimacy, like that, those are conversations that we actually need to be having, right? um Case in point, what does it also mean for us to be in a moment still where touch is dangerous,
Hmm.
right? Like who in the world thought that we would get to a point where we would be afraid to hug our parents and our grandparents, right? Like I I remember breaking down and crying Christmas of 2020. One, because I was still living in, for the most part of the pandemic, I was living in New Jersey alone. And I had a terrible bout with COVID in 2020, and I thought I was going to die.
Hmm.
And I have never been without my family for Christmas. And Christmas is already a hard time because my mother's gone. And so I
Hmm.
try to make sure that I'm around my grandmother. And so I went home for Christmas. I remembered for the 2 to 3 weeks after Christmas holding my breath every time I talked to my grandmother because I was listening for if there was something wrong, different in her voice.
Or like,
Every
did you
time
get her
she,
sick, you mean?
every time she said she was tired, I was like, is she tired because she was up playing solitaire all night, or is she tired because she may have cold? Like,
Mm.
and I cried because I said nobody should ever feel like that. Nobody should ever feel like that. And I don't even think that we have fully, it will be decades before we are able to really count up the totalizing cost of what it means, has meant for us to live in this pandemic the ways that we did. So, how do we bring those conversations as well as intimacy conversations into a space, marry that with biblical scholarship that may challenge how we look at some passages, right?
Mm.
Combine that with broader conversations about sin and flourishing that give people room to make decisions that they deem best suitable for their life without the attached shame, judgment, and finger wagging. Like,
Mm.
I think that that's where we've got to get to. Those are the conversations that make me excited. Um, but I think that they're so ripe and rich with the truth of what it looks like to be people who care for each other and who recognize that life and the conditions of life look different from people than they may look like for you.
Yeah. 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 Can I say that conversation about like sex really terrifies me just because of my kids?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah,
theologically, I'm right there with you.
yeah,
As an adult, I'm right there with you. But to be clear, I'm happily married. So like, I ain't got an
right.
issue here. Yay.
Yeah.
I don't know how to have that conversation with my kids.
But
If I
and
was
I
the one,
think that the
and I teach
difference
Sunday
is
school too to like third
right.
graders. So like, it's hard
And I
to,
think that's not the conversation that we have with kids. So like the conversation
yeah, but
um
if we're doing the conversation right, the kids will see it modeled in the adults in the church. Like they would like
so
in
so I
community.
think but I think that part of that are the healthy conversations, right? So the conversations that I had with my cousin, that I have always had with my cousin, who is about to graduate high school this year, is that this is a really beautiful thing that I really want you to do with when you are old enough to really deal with the weight and the of its beauty.
Mm.
And I told her, and I said, and most people, they do wait until they're married, to because it's most beautiful and sacred to them in that context. And then we had the conversation. And I said, I didn't wait. But I have friends who did.
Hmm.
And I want for you, because there's so much that comes along with this. And I told her, I was like, I was out of high school. I was in college. Like I had so many other things on my mind. And I told her, I was like, there's so much other stuff I want you to do and focus on that does not include this.
Yeah.
And then we had the conversation that I want you to promise me that before you do anything, we'll have that conversation. And as her cousin, and I told my uncle who's her father and my aunt who's her mom, I will hold confidence as long as she's not in danger.
Yeah.
And I told that to her too. You tell me something, and you're in danger, we all gonna have to have a conversation. But the way that I talked to her about intimacy and sex and have always talked to her is much different than the conversation that I have with my homegirl who's 36, who's still a virgin, and who wants to be married and is afraid that she's running out of time to be a mom.
Mm.
That's a very different conversation. And I think what has to happen when we talk about the children and what we model is what we've unfortunately done in church is we've had a one size fits all conversation about sex and sexuality. So what works for the 4-year-old is supposed to work for the 14, the 24, the 34, and the 44-year-old. And that's just not the case,
Mm.
right? Like, and there are ways that we can have healthy, honest conversations with young people that prioritize waiting, right? That say, I want you to. Like I want you to not feel, especially in a world where they get bombarded with sex,
Mm.
and like you can't my one of my friends was telling me that they found ways people have found ways to use the algorithms on YouTube Kids to put sex conversations on YouTube Kids in cartoons.
Mm.
And so it can't be a situation where you're just letting them watch YouTube now. You gotta watch and see what's going on. And so I think that there are ways that we can have healthy conversations with kids that prioritize waiting, that emphasize one, the beauty and the safety
Mm.
of waiting to partner in that way in marriage or just waiting period. And then I think there's room for us to really have a shift in our conversations when we're dealing with adults, that does not make them, that doesn't infantilize them, but also is very respectful of their agency and the world that we live in.
Yeah. 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 It's a hard thing. Either way,
Yeah,
it's
it
a hard
is.
thing. So at the very, very beginning, you had talked about part of what is you is, the power that words have, and that's a big part of your life. It's writing, words, etc. So for you, Candice, when you try to put words to whatever the heck God is, what is that for you?
Whew. I first honor that and name that words are going to be insufficient. God is the most consistent, the most empathetic, the most compassionate, the most accountable, the most gracious, the most kind force in my life. Um, God is the most consistent force I believe in the world. Um, and God is, if I was to describe God, um, and I talk about that in the book too, about like I think that if we were just to describe God, we had to put God in human form. It would be a person who has loved and cared for us. If I had to describe God in words, I think they would always be the most lush, like decadent words.
Mm.
Like, and then they will also be the most decadent and simplistic words that encompass just sheer being and existence. Um, and then I would still fail because there hasn't been a word or anything to capture what and who God is to me. Like when you ask me that question, to be honest, I think it is fully in the like that feeling
Mm.
that you get right before you're about to describe. Like it's almost like when you're at church and you're about or talking to someone and you are about to talk about just how good God is and how good God has been and like this joy that you have, and you take that deep breath, like right before, like that little breath right before you're about to talk, to me, it's in that breath. Cause you are acknowledging, all right, I'm about to put this in words, but I really don't have no words for just what this makes me feel like. So that's all I got. Like that's what that is for me.
Mm,
That's what that is for me.
I like that. I like that. And that word lush for some reason feels good.
It does.
That's a deep word, lush. That's not a word that people use. I don't use that word ever. Those two times right there, that's the entire year of usage. So I did warn you, existential at
No, no,
the end.
no. So I have a. So now that you told me that, you're gonna have to use Lush at least once a month
Once a
for the
month.
rest of the year.
I'll
For the
check in
rest of
with
the
you.
year,
I'll
you
let
gotta
you
use
know.
it.
I'm a
Okay,
man of my
let me
word.
know.
I make very few promises, and I will do them.
Okay.
It's easy to keep them when you don't make a lot. I'm
Right.
sure I can do that. Yeah. So where should people do the things that are related to you on where
Okay. Yeah.
the things
The
the weird
things.
part of every
Right.
podcast episode, that thing.
Right.
Yeah.
The things.
Hmm.
So one, go by Red Lip Theology wherever you get your books. My dog Charlie will thank you, because that's how he eats. So definitely go get his book. Go get the book. It's wherever you get your books. You can follow me at Candice Benbow, CandiceBenbow, at Twitter and on Instagram. Um, and my website is CandiceBenbow.com. I have a Facebook. I don't know how to, you can probably find me on there. But I'm mostly on Instagram and Twitter. And when I'm not on those, I am on Pinterest pinning some recipes I'm probably never gonna try. So
That looks good. I'm gonna make that. I'm never gonna make
I'm
that
never
ever.
like, so what's so funny is at the griot, I'm about to start Friday recipes simply because I looked at my Pinterest board and I have 60. Like I have them all broken down by food, vegetables, meats, proteins, drinks, sweets. And then I went through there and I was like, how many of these have you actually made? Like the the boards, they have dope names and titles. They're very color coded and beautiful. And I probably have made two things. So now this will be the year that I actually do the things that are on my Pinterest board.
That'd be fun. That's nice. Candice, I have enjoyed chatting with you quite a bit. It's been
Thank
joy.
you.
So
I
yeah.
have to.
Yeah.
I have
Good.
to. Thank you.
I'm gonna end. There's a button. There we go.
Okay.
I haven't actually haven't recorded an episode in a few weeks.